Hey guys, welcome to this new module for the week. As promised, we're going to learn about APIs, what they are. If you can see on the screen, we're going to talk a little bit about these guys right here. So this is kind of a lecture slash demo, lecture slash lab. So this week, I am not going to throw you in the fire because that would not be fair to you. So we're going to learn about some stuff. We're going to set up our environment. We're going to build an API the first week, but it's just going to be an API that interfaces locally using an array. So if you remember, if you have taken data structure, not sure if you have, you should have, but either way, one of the popular data structures is called an array. And if we were in class, I'd ask you what that is and explain how that works, but we're not in class. So we're going to use an array to capture our information locally, and this will show you the concept of what an API is and what type of API that we're going to be using in the class. And going into next week, we'll be kind of revisiting that process, but then what we'll be doing is we'll adding another layer. We'll be adding a way to interface against a database. So then we have to set up a database, and we have to interface and do the whole database thing and so forth. But we'll take it in small strides, where like 1 week we'll focus on one part of it, like maybe gets, and maybe another week we'll focus on puts and posts and all that great stuff. So just wanted to kind of talk a little bit of that and tell you what we're looking to do down the pipeline. And what we're going to do is we're not going to be using anyone else's API. What's the fun of capturing someone else's API when we can make our own API and pull information back? So I think this will be a fun exercise. So first and foremost, what is an API? If anyone's even heard of an API, and I hope that you have. So the term of it is called Application Programming Interface. Okay, so one of the things about it is it's a different layer. So we talked about different structures and how I show you that you should structure your source code, such as you have a folder for images, a folder for JavaScript, you have a folder for libraries and so forth. API is an interface that allows, think of it as like, okay, so for example, think of this, you have your website, right? So when we think of a website, it is hosted somewhere. So it's hosted on a server, or it could be like AWS or Azure, which is the cloud base. So it's sourced somewhere, right? So you have that environment hosted somewhere, but the programming code itself has to interact with different areas. So you might have a website, you might have a database, for example. So you have a database that's hosted on a different server, should never be on the same server, or like AWS as well. So you have this database that's hosted somewhere, you have your website that's hosted somewhere, and you might have other things in play as well. So you might have a reporting server, so maybe a Tableau server that's hosted on a different server. So maybe think of that as more of an analytic aspect of it. Now you have the API. How's that play a role? So think of this, you have your website, and then you have in the middle, you have the API, and then you have your database. So think about this. This guy right here can talk to both of these areas. So it's a medium that allows all the things to be driven through that interface. And that's why they call it interface, because it interfaces with maybe a database, maybe a website, and so forth. So there's a variety of different locations that it can or can't interface with. And I was just thinking, I do have slides on this whole thing, but it's fine. I'll do it this way. I kind of like this better. So anyways, so there are two important APIs. So we'll go way back when. So when I say way back when, there was a different way of doing things. So back in the day, and I say back in the day, I mean like coming up in the industry for myself in the late 90s, early 2000s, most places, and the company I worked for at the time was AT&T, we use something called SOAP. So SOAP is, it stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. So what is Simple Object Access Protocol? So it's a message specification. It allows you to exchange information between different systems and applications. So in this example here, that what I provided, you might have one system that's hosting a website. You might have another system that's hosting a database. You may have another site hosting analytical tools and so forth. So you kind of get the gist of where I'm going here. So you have these different things, and that's what SOAP is. It's a structure format that allows you to send messages back and forth. Now, the key thing in this, in order to send these messages back and forth, they use have you ever heard of XML? So XML is the methodology that they would use to send the messages back. So if you've never seen XML, I'd say Google it. It's very similar to HTML. It looks like that. It uses a tag-based language. I'm trying to find an example, so I just kind of grab something real quick, and I'll copy it over here. So XML would be something like this, looking like that. So it looks like that. Very basic information. Looks like a tag base. It looks like HTML right off the bat. So its key things that you had to set up within XML was something called an envelope. Now we adopted that, so that's great. Envelope was during your structure. So it's like, imagine you're sending an email and you have to put a subject line, right? Perfect. That's what envelope is. Then there was something called encoding. Encoding was expression of the type of data that you were sending to it. So going back to your CMPS 160 class, one of the things that you learned early on, that you had to define what data type that you were going to use. Was it a varchar? Was it an integer? Was it a decimal, and so forth? Those are things that you had to define. Where within JavaScript and jQuery, you don't have to define those data types, but within SOAP, you have to provide that in encoding. The other thing is they have requests, and requests are how an API request was structured. What is the request? What are you looking to get back, or what are you looking to request? And then lastly, there was response. So responses were, what was a response to the structure? So, you're sending an account number and you're expecting to get back new information on that account number. So that is how a typical SOAP message was set up. Now, I would lie to you if I said it was the most easiest thing in the world. It was actually probably the most complicated things in the world. It was not a fun process personally. I didn't like it. It was I had really bad experience with it. We had to write an API for work, and it was like 3 layers down from the API, and it took us about 4 weeks to figure out a bug that we had in it, how we were sending information over, and it was just challenging. But we got it to work, but it just wasn't the best way of doing things. It was, it's like sometimes I question how like Route 51 was built in Pittsburgh area. Like, what were they thinking? Or some of the roads in Pittsburgh in general, what were they thinking? That's what they thought was the best. And that's the same thing with SOAP. At the time they developed a mechanism to transfer information across the internet, and it worked, but it just wasn't I don't think the best approach. But anyways, so let's talk about the next one, and this is the one that we're going to use. We're not going to use SOAP. We're going to use something called RESTful. And so RESTful, I'm going to change this here. I don't want to be stuck in that mode again. So let's copy this. All right. So now we're going to talk about RESTful. So what is RESTful? So it's a different way of writing APIs. This one stands for, let me write it down. Stands for representational state transfer. So this is a better, a more reliable, and such an easier way to learn APIs. I think the XML approach was not simple like they specified it was, but the RESTful I think is a more subtle way of doing things. I think it's more convenient, more relaxed, and so forth. So that's what I really like about how it's set up. So, we talked about some of the key guys here within SOAP, and their key guys here within RESTful. So you have something called get, and we'll talk about all these in a second. We have something called put, we have something called post, and we have something called delete, which we could all figure out what that is. So this is irrelevant to how, you've seen up there within SOAP that envelope encoding requests and responses. Well, we have 4 things, and these 4 actions. Get is a function that allows us to get information. So we can send it, we could say we send it, maybe it requests a parameter, we provide it the count number, and then we get information back from it. Or we just call an API and we get information back, like a whole list of values. Put is, think of it as going back to the database. In a database, if you want to update a response or a table, it would be an update statement. So put is equivalent to an update statement. It's a modification of something in a database. All these statements are things that are coming from the database. Post is anytime that you want to create something new, a new message. So, you go out to Facebook or Instagram or TikTok and you want to create a new message, that's called a post. You made a post. That's what's happening here. And then lastly, delete is purging. You're removing something. Hard code delete, a hard delete from the database table. So that is what we're going to learn in this week. Well, actually this course, we're going to learn about RESTful, which is an easier way of learning APIs. It makes it easier transaction, I think. So if you guys have questions on this, please reach out to me and we could go over a little bit further. So that is kind of the high level of what we're going to learn from an API standpoint. Now we'll talk about how to code it and do all that fun stuff in the next video. This is just going to be there's going to be 2 videos for a week. This first video is more of an introduction of what we're getting ourselves into. And the next video is going to be more around how do we set up these tools that we're going to use and so forth, just to make it simple. All right, so let's talk about Node.js. Have you ever heard of Node.js? And if you haven't, I highly doubt you to just go out to Node.js. Let's see what the site is. All right, nodejs.org. Download it. If you're using a Mac or PC, it should come up. Choose recommend it for users. What you're going to want to do is have a couple features. Once you download it, you'll have the features in there that allow you to check your package managers and so forth. So Node.js is it's an open source. It works across all platforms. It's not just Windows. It's Windows. It's Apple. It's Linux, etc. It works across all. And so this was really cool when it came out because it was a new way of, for the longest time we've learned that JavaScript was only able to be accessed on a website. It's published on a website and that's it. That's the only place it could live. Well, this gave it a whole new environment. Now it can live anywhere pretty much. It's almost like a normal programming language. They can live anywhere. It doesn't have to live on the web page itself. It can live somewhere else behind the scenes. So that's really cool. So this will be required to download. If you have problems installing it, let me know. It's pretty straightforward whether you're using a Mac or PC. It's pretty straightforward to install it. So that is definitely a requirement. The other thing that is a requirement is Postman. So let's stop down here for a second. So we talked about Node.js, what that is. Let's go into TypeScript first, and then we'll talk about the other part. So Node.js is just we'll just say an environment. So what's cool about the environment is Node.js can run it as a service, and it's running 24/7. TypeScript is the coding base that we're going to follow. So TypeScript, if you go to typescriptlanguage.org, it's a programming language that uses JavaScript. You'll learn, like for example, we learned about jQuery last week. jQuery is just an extension of JavaScript, and that's what this is right here. It's an extension of JavaScript. We're going to use it to when we're coding our API. So it's another form of JavaScript that we're going to use for API development. We're going to use it within Node.js. So it's the primary language that they use. So as you can see some of the stuff here. So that is the scripting language that we're going to follow when we're doing our API stuff. At least from the Node.js side of it. So there's going to be two layers to this. Like, early on we're going to learn about APIs, but once we really get running and everything's really kicking. So we're going to do that on one part, and ultimately what we're going to do is we're going to build this API and we're going to run it as a service. So it's going to be running like the little hamster on the wheel. It's going to be running, and then it's going to be connecting to a database, and it's going to be grabbing information from the database. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go and take our pages that you guys are developing, and what we're going to do is we're going to add something to that page. So whether it's a form, whether it's to get information back, whatever the case is, we're going to add information to our form. So we're going to go in there and build it with an HTML, JavaScript, CSS, whatever we have set up. We're going to build that information, and then we're going to build action events, and these action events are going to make calls, and these calls are going to communicate with that service that's running. And so it's going to be really awesome. It's going to be a really good experience. So I'm really happy that you guys were here to learn this. I think you're really going to have a lot of fun with this. It may be dangerous. It may not be dangerous. It may be difficult at first, but that's why I'm here to help out. So anyways, so that's what we're going to be using. Lastly, so TypeScript is the language that we will use. All right, so lastly, when you are testing your APIs, so you need a way to test them. There's a couple ways, and the best way is Postman. Postman is what I'll use throughout this course. I highly recommend downloading a copy. You could run it in the cloud, but the only way it works in the cloud is if you have an API that has a website address. So if you have the API saved and pushed into a server, then you could call it. But if you don't and you're just running it locally, you'll need to download it and run the app locally, else it will not work. So just FYI, so we'll be utilizing this. And then I also wanted to show you this other tool, which is Swagger. We use it at work as well, but it's more or less a tool that that can embed in your API structure. So if you're building your API structure, you could embed it within that environment. And what that means is you could just go to that website address. So let's say you have, I don't know, jseaman.it.pointpark.edu, for example, you have /API. You can embed it in there, and you can have like API Swagger, and you can do all your testing from the web base. So that's one way of doing it. I'm not sure if they have something they could download yet or not. They might, but for the most part, I just use Postman. It's pretty good. It was one of the first ones out there, so I think it'll work well for what we're trying to accomplish. So just a summary of what we've talked about. We're at 18 minutes. We talked about what an API is. We talked about the different APIs, which is SOAP and RESTful. We're going to use RESTful in a class. We talked about the 4 different representations of REST and SOAP. We talked about what Node.js is. We talked about what TypeScript is, and we talked about Postman and Swagger. So I'd recommend downloading all those tools, at least Postman and Node.js for sure. I'm sure you already have Visual Studios. So what will happen in the next video, we will walk through setting up an API, but like I said, we're going to use it, we're going to run it locally. We are going to set it up to the point where we're calling and getting and all that stuff, but it's all local. It's all hard-coded data in arrays that we have built, and I just want you guys to kind of get the hang of that and using Postman and calling a website and all that fun stuff. Later on we'll learn how to, once we have APIs up and running, we'll learn how to connect it with the website and all that fun stuff. But we have to start with the training wheels first, basically. So if you have questions, reach out. If not, thank you for watching this video, and we will talk soon. Bye, guys.